So, today, we're going to tackle one of the most complex and pivotal moments in modern history, the events surrounding the creation of the State of Israel. If you really want to understand the headlines we see today, you absolutely have to go back to the beginning. And really, this whole story, this whole conflict, boils down to one powerful question. How did this one small piece of land become the heart of the national story for two different peoples, the Jews and the Palestinian Arabs? We're going to walk through the key moments that set these two stories on a collision course. Okay, so here's our roadmap. We'll start with the promises made right after World War I. Then, we'll look at how the population changed dramatically under British rule, what happened when the UN stepped in, the War of 1948, and finally the legacy that we are still dealing with today. All right, let's set the scene. Our story really kicks off right after World War I. The Ottoman Empire, which had controlled the region for hundreds of years, had just collapsed. And into that power vacuum steps a new major player, Great Britain. So the League of Nations comes up with this thing called the British Mandate for Palestine. Now, on paper, the goal was simple: guide the territory towards its own independence. But Britain had already been making some very big and, as we'll see, very conflicting promises about who this land really belonged to. And the most famous of these promises, the one you've probably heard of, is the Balfour Declaration from 1917. It's a letter from the British government saying they support creating a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But, and this is a huge but, pay close attention to the second half of that sentence. It promised that nothing would be done to harm the rights of the non-Jewish communities already living there. And right there, that's the core of the problem. You have this promise of a national home for one group. And for the other group, the Palestinian Arabs, who, by the way, made up 90% of the population at the time, the promise was only for civil and religious rights. See what's missing? There's no mention of their political or national rights. That ambiguity was like a ticking time bomb. So, these political promises weren't just words on paper. They had a huge, immediate impact on the ground, kicking off a period of massive change and, you guessed it, a whole lot of tension. With British rule in place, the doors to Palestine opened for more Jewish immigration. This was pushed by the Zionist movement, which aimed to establish a Jewish state. But what really poured fuel on the fire was the terrifying rise of anti-Semitism and the Nazis in Europe. For many Jews, finding a safe haven became a matter of life and death. Now, this is where you can really see the change. Just look at these numbers. In 1922, the Jewish population was around 11%. Fast forward just 25 years to 1947, and that number had jumped to 32%. That's not a slow trickle. That is a massive and incredibly rapid demographic shift. And of course, a shift that fast is going to have some serious real-world consequences. As Jewish organizations bought up land, often from wealthy landlords who didn't even live there, the Arab farmers who had worked that land for generations were often displaced. This created a lot of resentment, and tensions just exploded, leading to a major Arab revolt against both the British and against Jewish immigration. Okay, so by the time World War II ends, the situation in Palestine is spiraling out of control. Britain just can't handle it anymore, so they basically wash their hands of the problem and toss it to the newly formed United Nations. And we have to remember the context here, because it is absolutely critical. The world was just beginning to understand the full, unimaginable horror of the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were murdered. This created this powerful wave of international support for the idea that a Jewish state was essential, a place to ensure a catastrophe like that could never happen again. So the UN gets involved, and in 1947, they come up with a solution. Resolution 181, known as the Partition Plan. The idea was, on paper, pretty simple. Split the territory into two new countries, one for Arabs and one for Jews. And Jerusalem, it would become an international city, run by the UN, belonging to neither side. But the reactions to this plan, well, they could not have been more different. Jewish leaders, even though they weren't thrilled with all the details, accepted it. It was a path to finally having their own state. But the Arab world and Palestinian leaders rejected it completely. From their point of view, the UN was basically giving away their homeland to solve a European problem, and they saw it as a profound injustice. So with the two sides at a total impasse and the British packing their bags, that plan for a peaceful split just fell apart. And what came next was war. The year 1948 would become the defining moment, an event remembered in two totally different ways. And wow, things happened fast.
On May 14th, 1948, the very day the British Mandate ended, David Ben-Gurion stood up and declared the independence of the State of Israel. The very next day, 5 Arab armies invaded, and the war was on. By early 1949, it was over, with Israel as the clear victor.
For Israelis, 1948 is celebrated as their War of Independence. It's a story of survival against all odds. But for Palestinians, that exact same period is known as the Nakba. It's an Arabic word that means the catastrophe. It marks the moment they lost their homeland and their society was shattered.
So what did the war mean on the ground? Well, the new state of Israel now controlled 78% of the land. That's significantly more territory than the UN's original partition plan had even suggested.
But the human cost, well, it was staggering. During the war, more than 750,000 Palestinians either fled the fighting or were forced from their homes in the areas that became Israel. This created a refugee crisis that, as we know, has never been resolved. And this is the key. You have 2 totally divergent realities emerging from the same war. For Israelis, it's the fulfillment of a long-held dream, their own sovereign nation, a safe haven. But for Palestinians, it's the exact opposite. Their society is torn apart, their own dreams of a nation are crushed, and hundreds of their villages are wiped off the map. So, the end of the war didn't bring peace, not even close. Instead, the armistice lines of 1949 just sort of froze the conflict in place, creating a tense new reality that would shape the Middle East for decades to come. So let's look at the new map that was drawn by the war. Israel was on it, firmly established. The land that was supposed to be a Palestinian state, well, it was carved up. Jordan took the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinian people, they were left scattered, stateless, and living as refugees across the region. And that brings us right back to our central question. The events of 1948, this creation of a state for one people and the creation of a refugee crisis for another, they aren't just dusty old history. They are the living, breathing foundation of the conflict we still see today. Understanding this moment in all its complexity is the key to understanding everything that has happened since.